Those who won't obey me must die. My 16 holy bullets shall be your trial! God's bread!
What's up, everyone? Kane here, Captain of the Day's Pirates. The much-awaited Doflamingo guide coming your way. Overall, the structure of it's going to follow just like how we did Blackbeard. I'm going to try and rocket these out with every deck that was in the top 32 for the Nats this past weekend, and then going to go into other leaders going off of that as well. The quick kind of intro, if you didn't see the Blackbeard guide yet, check out kind of the channel and playlist for that. But it's going to be going into Doflamingo's deck list and kind of his core kind of play lines or cards you're going to see probably 100% of the time. Talk about some of the tech options that they have available to them, and if they're kind of playing into different matchups from their side of things, what cards we might see. And then talking about how we play a little bit more into them with their our tech options at a high level. Then going into kind of the guide portion of it more directly, we'll go into do we want to go first or not and why, our curves going first and second, those play lines along the way and decisions that can really make a difference as we get to 10 down and push through. How do we find that final punch? What losses are we kind of just going to be okay with losing? Because, I mean, at the end of the day, Doflamingo is the #1 represented deck in the meta. Consistently good in topping, and it was 11 of the top 32 decks at Nationals, so definitely something you're going to see around your locals rather consistently. So there's going to be games you lose, right? So we'll talk about kind of what those might look like, how can we make things favorable for us, and overall, I don't think this is a terrible matchup for us. I think we play very well into them. I think if we go first, we're favored into them. If they go first, I think they're slightly favored, but it's kind of still a high roll and a lot of math that matters a lot around what 2Ks and things we see. But we'll get into all that, and we'll cut over into kind of a deck list review here. All right, jumping in with a Dofi deck list here. I guess one thing I could have done was actually more directly copy one of the Nats topping lists, but really, core concept here you're going to be able to capture, and we're going to talk about some of the tech options and the most popular ones at that. This entire deck is built around, obviously, Doflamingo. If you're not familiar with his leader effect, he is a blue 5-life 5k leader, Donix 2 attached. When attacking, reveal a top card of your library. If it's a 4-cost or less, 7 Warlords of the Sea, then you put it into play rested. So it cheats cards off the top of your deck for basically a 3-down investment, but for that 3-down, you get to swing for 7 with your leader. Early on, and kind of in a long standing, if you've ever seen this deck, before their starter deck came out, then this Perona is pretty standard. They've always had kind of this option to reset the 5 top cards of their deck, or put them on the bottom. If they leave them on top, they obviously can rearrange them in the way that makes sense for their leader effect and draws. With the starter deck, they did get an additional one of these that is also a 2K, so it's a 7 Warlords of the Sea buggy that it also lets you look at the top 3. Noteworthy, this does not allow them to bottom deck any cards from their top of their deck, but it is something that's available. Oh, and actually, I did mean to put a 4th one in here, if I'm being honest. I didn't realize I saved this with 50 cards. I don't know exactly. I think basically all lists are on 4 of each of these now. It's basically your opening play. Alongside, you do also have Sengoku, which I missed in here somehow. That's hilarious. So actually, we'll talk about this card on the tech options, and we'll go here, and then we'll go. We're cutting a Perona because they definitely have 4 Sengokus. That's fine, we're going to roll with this just a little bit. Sengoku is a 1-cost 7 Warlords of the Sea searcher, so it kind of allows them to filter into the rest of their value engine and pieces. So this Jinbei is kind of the anchor piece of the deck, what card that some people are saying might be quote-unquote ban-worthy if looking to target Doflamingo. It is a 4-cost 5K that says play up to 1 4-cost Seven Warlords of the Sea from your hand other than Jinbei. So basically, almost the entire deck can be played off of this, and it can be played off of Leader Effect. So as early as turn 2, going first or going second, they are very available to develop 2 bodies, very often one being a 5K and then very often the second being a 6K. That's kind of their favorite 2, and really what you're afraid of with this deck is if they are going into a 6K body multiple times off of Jinbei and developing like an extremely wide board as early as turn 3. With this Boa, it is a blocker, which is obviously good for them. Luckily, it has no counter, which is good for us. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. I'm sorry, I keep saying library because I play Magic. Of your deck. Then they can place them on the top or bottom in any order they'd like. And then you give a Seven Warlords of the Sea character or a leader a Don. So also can be played off Leader Effect, and then before you get to counter, they put another Don on their leader, make it a 8K swing, which is also annoying. Or they're looking to play off this Jinbei, which just simply draws a card when it enters. No counter, but it replaces itself. So again, if you turn 2, you can 4 Don, play a 5K, a 6K, and draw a card. Very powerful. Another card that I do see some people are talk about not cutting, or early on in the deck's development, this was a little bit more of a contended card, but I think 3 or at least is pretty much standard nowadays. It is a 2-cost 3K Marshall D Teach, counter 1K, activate main, place 1 card from the top of your from your hand on top of your deck, put 2 Don onto one of your leaders or characters. So if you're on a 3 Don turn, you can pay 2 Don, play out Marshall D Teach, put 2 Don onto your leader, and then you have a Don left over to activate lead effect to play out whatever you put from your hand. So if you have like Teach, Jinbei, and a 6K in your opening hand, you can play this on turn 2, or you search one of these things, right? Or you set it up with one of your top deck manipulators. I guess if you do the top deck manipulator, then you don't need Teach. But that's kind of the consistency of this, right? We have 8 potential top deck manipulators on turn 1, as well as a searcher that gets us this Jinbei, gets us this Teach, gets us this Hancock, gets us this top deck manipulator, like gets us all our 2Ks and everything. So that's where this deck is just violently kind of aggressive. Then this deck does get filled out with a very strong utility suite, which is where the depth of play lines for this deck does really grind out consistency and make it one of the top performers in the deck, or in the meta. They have the Trafalgar Law, which we've talked about. Man, I might butcher his name. Trafalgar Law. I need to enunciate a little better. I know I'm working on that. But he is on play. Return one of your own characters, which sounds like a slight negative, but when the entire deck has on play value, it's not really that negative. Or you can rebounce your stackers, rebounce your buggy, so you have a 2K in hand, rebounce the searcher, and then you bounce a 4-cost or lower to its owner's hand. Noteworthy here, it doesn't have to be an opponent's character. Usually they're going to bounce one of your characters and deny like your Zoro Juro, or whatever other 4-cost or less, Onami, put it back in your hand type of thing. But they also can just put their own things back in hand if they want to replay out Jinbei and get value. Maybe they'll swing with the Jinbei, then play Law, bounce the Jinbei, replay the Jinbei, get a second body out, and now the Jinbei is standing up, so you can't swing into it as well. And there's crazy playlines that become available through this. Beyond that, this Gecko is just a 4-cost recursion piece. You can pick up any non-Gecko 4-cost or less Warlord of the Sea or 3 Thriller Bark. So Verona is Thriller Bark, noteworthy, but you're usually not picking that up. Usually you're picking up a Boa that got KO'd, maybe a 2K. All your 2Ks are obviously Warlords, or Verona or a Jinbei if you just want to kind of grind out value or whatever. Such a strong card. And then for the 2K suite, Mihawk is pretty nice because it's just another swinger that can filter your hand, draw 2 trash 2. Crocodile, technically you can bounce the thing. I've seen people bounce like their searcher with it before, but usually it's just a 2K or just a body that's available. Then with that and the buggy, you're at 12 2Ks already. There are some additional ones that you can run that we'll talk about later. Basically, I don't know. I'm not going to say all because it's not all, but within the Doflamingo decks, actually I do think all of them run pudding, maybe 2 to 3. This is a threat that you absolutely need to play around as you're playing against them. And I'll talk more about kind of all these play lines in some of the later slides, obviously, but It just takes your opponent's hand, shuffle it into their deck, and draw 5 new cards. So you have 8 cards in hand, you just lost 3 cards out of your hand. So this is something you have to be extremely cognizant of. This is a card that will lose you the game if you don't play it, or they will win the game with it if you are not paying close attention. And it is one of their kind of strong suits into some other controlling matchups as well. So I think basically all of them are on 2, at least. I think that's a conservative statement. Maybe that's not 100% true, but pretty much. Jozu, as far as the Nationals topping list, I do believe Jozu was kind of a standout among those. I think it's also just very good in the mirror matchup, so that might be part of it as well. But it is similar to a Law, but it's a Whitebeard Pirate 6 cost 7k with 1k counter. Bounce one of your own characters, return a 6 cost or less character to its owner's hand. So just great flexibility, can remove a lot of blockers out of the way and deny a lot of value and tempo while developing a 7k body. Not being searchable, but I do think a lot of the performing lists and Nats, like I said, was on probably 3 or so of these. So definitely expect to see this and consider it with maybe bouncing your queen or things like that. Gravity Blade Raging Tiger, again, I think is relatively standard. Everyone is running probably 1 to 2 at least, if not more, I think. Technically not 100%, I'm sure, but I'm pretty sure there's quite a bit of Gravity Blade Raging Tiger around. It is just a main, place up to 2 6 cost or less characters on the bottom of their owner's deck. So just great removal for anything 6 or less. If you try and play like double queen, they can bottom both of them. If you're not ready for that, that might, screw you. So that's just stuff to think about while you're kind of grinding out with them. Then also Perfume Femur is their own Diablo Jambe that's actually a little bit better because it gives 2 cost, but it gives 2k power as well, and denying the ability to block. I do think some people are only on 1, others are on 2, but at the end of the day, obviously something you have to be concerned about or play around down the stretch, or you'll get caught out just like we catch people with John Blay and Roger, right? I think this is more or less very close to the standard. Some numbers may be slightly manipulated. Like I said, I think Jozu maybe not everyone's running on Perfume Femur. I think between these 2 cards, you kind of need them for Black Yellow Luffy, is my understanding, even though Pudding's pretty good in a Black Yellow Luffy as well. But this core isn't really teched for RP Luffy. I'll tell you that much. It's definitely much more concerned with the overall meta, the mirror match, and that type of grind. Where I will mention some of the kind of tech or sideboard or options that they might be playing. We'll grab that other card that I did cut briefly there. Not everyone is playing these. I'd say most are not. What I've seen personally is the Kaido, Boa, Doflamingo, and Red Rock. I've all seen among Dofi's decks, and this vanilla as well. But we'll run through all of them. 9 cost, 9k Mihawk, does bottom deck a 7 cost or less. Could bottom deck our like Eustace Captain Kidd or things like that. Very good tempo swing for them while they develop a 9k into us. I've only seen one person playing it. Luckily, they didn't see it against me, but it's a card to be relatively aware of, especially if they're being more concerned with big bodies in other matchups that could become apparent. I'm a little bit surprised this doesn't see a little bit more play. I guess they're just a little bit more aggressive than this, but it is a Warlord blocker, Doflamingo, 1k counter, 3 cost, 4k power. Look at the top 5 cards of your deck and restack them in any order. I guess maybe between Teach and Boa and everything else you just don't need anymore, but it's a card, it's an additional blocker they could have. Vanilla Gecko 6k, just to have more 6k, sometimes I'll run this. Kaido is kind of a pain in our butt. If they do just get up to 10 down and slam this and draw 4 cards, and they already had a decent hand size, could get a little sketchy having that 12k swinger in the play. Being able to maybe set up a blocker could be good, but they can also then grab blade that blocker, so it's kind of tough. This Law would kind of be a little more annoying for us. I think maybe they just don't run it because they have Pudding, but it is a 2k counter. This says activate main, put it back in the owner's hand, and if your opponent has 6 or more cards in their hand, they place 1 at the bottom of their deck. I feel like this would be kind of good tempo swing, especially in the mirror match, but they aren't usually running it, and they aren't going to activate it too much even if they are running it, but something to be somewhat aware of, I suppose. Boa is again a tempos play that can kind of be pretty inconvenient for us if they answer our Eustace Captain Kidd with this. She can go on play a non-Luffy character, which is funny, cannot attack until the end of their opponent's next turn, and then they can bottom deck a 1 cost or less. Usually they're not doing that second piece, or maybe they'll bottom a Nami just because they can. But that freeze can be pretty inconvenient, especially if it's on something like a Kid that's denying us that value at the same time. Doflamingo, this is a 7-cost, 7K, bounce a 7 cost to the owner's hand. I don't think Doflamingos run this as much. I think Boas kind of tend to run this. I ran this last night. But I have seen it, and it's just something to be aware of. It bounces your kids back to hand, which then you probably just replay them, but it is what it is. And Gum Gum Red Rock. I think more are teching this in probably for Marshall D. Teach more than anything. Actually, they just beat the crap out of Marshall D. Teach. Maybe they aren't teching in Red Rock right now. The Nats list didn't really, but at the end of the day, it is just 6 costs bottom deck anything. This can be a pretty good answer for a Newgate or whatever else that we might be, playing out and they just want to get rid of. Bottom deck of Shanks or a Kid or a Newgate can all slow us down if we don't have, follow-up threats to continue through with. So that's kind of what you can expect from the Dofi deck list. Obviously, we'll get into more gameplay after I go through kind of all the other content around going first and mulligans and the kind of game plan throughout your curve and so on. But I am going to pivot over to my current deck list. This is my paper deck list and what I've been running. So I'm not going to go through the entire deck tech. I do basically do a deck tech for this in my Treasure Cup 7-3 deck tech list that I made a week or two ago, where I do kind of go through my Treasure Cup list and then I make the changes to this list and explain why I'm here right now. But where you can kind of flex or be more concerned with Dofi is additional 2Ks. I think there's a reason that when we did our OP09 winning deck analysis in the West, we did see around an average of 10 2Ks, and some of the more successful lists even had as much as 12 2Ks. And I think just in kind of a Dofi and Purple Luffy world, that is probably a favorable investment and worthwhile to do. Right now, I'm kind of flexing into 10 2Ks in my own way. I have a 9th 2K and a Radical Beam to kind of match that. In addition to that, we do also have, obviously, all of our power increasers. Personally, I think 4 Newgates is the only way you can really breed any consistency against Dofi. Not any, but I think 4 Newgates, and then you can go elsewhere. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I know there is a lot of conversation around Shanks and how Shanks may mathematically be comparable to Newgate. I, quite frankly, hard disagree. The fact that this is a 9-cost, it's much more consistently going to come out a turn earlier than your Shanks will. Shanks has no effect on their leader effect, which as we've shown, they are wanting to swing 7K at least at you every turn. And then the KO effect is also nice. It's not the biggest in this matchup. Being able to knock out a Teach is nice. But then just the entire math being +2 instead of +1 a turn earlier more consistently. I don't like. I do think Shanks is worthwhile, and I think maybe a 3-3 split is something I could entertain. I am testing Shanks as well, but Shanks, just for your knowledge, is all of your opponent's characters have -1K power. It's only their characters, and it's a rush 12K. But the consistency of being able to be, again, more defensive, more consistently have that Gum Gum Giant Don open. I know with the Eustace Captain Kidd, you can have one open, but I always have one open with Newgate. And you know what? If I have a Kid, then I'm a 9K leader with 2 Don open. That is disgusting. That is a near unkillable board state if you have any sort of life or hand size or Gum Gum Giants. Like, it's so defensive. It's so strong. But again, Shanks is a valid defensive option additional to the power increasers I do like. To that end as well, I am only on 2 Yasops. I do wish I had a 3rd Yasop in here. If they let me play 52 cards, I'd probably play a 3rd Beckman and a 3rd Yasop. But as is, to get those extra 2Ks in and all the other cards that I just am really liking right now, that's where I'm at. I also am kind of side-eyeing maybe trimming. in the list where I added Shanks, I did cut one here, and add 2 Shanks. But I could also see maybe swapping one of these up to a Yasop. This Luffy is also very strong from a card economy standpoint into a Dofi. Being able to go 7, and then also draw a card, and maybe even if you have a kid on board, you're also a 7K at that point as well. That card economy really starts to matter down the grind because they're going to attack your hand. That's how they kind of get after you, right? They're going to chip away at your hand with usually minimal swings, but if they do, they will try and rip 2 cards at a time, sometimes 2. Obviously, that's kind of where flashing or bluffing giants can become very strong as well. But otherwise, like really the kind of primary tech, if you're trying to lean more into Doflamingo, I would go more Yasops. If you want the 4th Eustace Captain Kid, I could also see that. Sanjis aren't as necessary if you're surviving and developing these other big bodies. The Sanji will snag you some surprise lethal when they think they have a boa, and you now have 1 more attacker and they don't have a boa. They can really jar the math pretty effectively. But if you wanted to kind of split these into Beckmans and kids, or maybe if you don't like Beckman as much, that could be a Sanji and a kid as well. Could be a couple options to just get up to like as much as 12 power increasers, and I think that would really solidify that matchup fairly well for you. At least breed quite a bit of consistency into it. I thought I had one other option. Obviously, radical beams are pretty good if you aren't trying to go down on Don early. You can play something like a turn 2 Mr. 2, leave a Don open for a radical beam if they hit you early. Yeah, maybe that was all the tech, and I'll go ahead and we'll transition into over whether we want to go 1st or 2nd. All right, quick kind of addition to this section of deck tech and options. So if you're on Bond Clay and you have the Rojuros, I personally am not playing above 8 ramp right now. I'm more insistent on playing more Yasops, which are 1K counters and defensive flexibility and playable in your non-ramp or in along with your ramp curve. I just think it's more flexible and more defensive. However, if you do want to play additional ramp or you don't have Mr. 2s, a excellent Dofi and Purple Luffy tech option is It's to Die For. This is a 3-cost event that says add up to 1 Don from your Don deck instead of is active. Then if your opponent has a 6K power or more in play, get a 2nd active Don. So both of those decks want to play 6Ks turn 2. That's their goal. That is their number 1 line. That is what they're looking for every single game, especially against our 6K leader. They want to play 6Ks turn 2. That allows us to, if we're going first, maybe just play this as a free ramp or hold it for a turn, then play it for a potential double ramp the next turn. Or if you're going second and they do that, you go from 4 Don to 6 Don on your 2nd turn, and that means you're at 8 Don on your 3rd turn, and that means you're on a 3rd turn Newgate. I've never lost with that high roll, personally. I think that high roll is better than a Shanks ramp high roll, personally. Turn 3 Newgate going second's pretty disgusting. So again, also if you're going to a locals where you know there's going to be a lot of Dofi and Purple Luffy, tossing in 2 of them might be worth it. So yeah, we'll go back into some of the other things we're going to talk about. But we did want to kind of add this on at the end real quick because it is a great tech option. All right, yes, we do want to go first. This matchup is very volatile based on who's going first or second. I think when we go first, we are favored into them. When we go second, it's probably favored to them slightly. With enough Newgates, anything's possible, really. But we'll kind of run through all of that. I definitely think Newgates are the way that we make this matchup consistent. Doflamingo is the reason I'm on 4 Newgates right now. In 8.5 and 8, or really more 8 when it was, going to be Lucci's and Bonnie's everywhere. I was lower on Newgate, but now that we're in a meta where Purple Luffy and Doflamingo combined for nearly half of the top 32, you're going to have to be considerate of these as we go into bigger events, right? Yes, if we go first and we play Zoro on 3 Don, they do have an opportunity to use their law to bounce it to our hand and deny us that value. It's a little annoying, but it's fine. We'll talk more about it on the curve, but either replaying it or having a Mr. 2 just means you have an extra 1K in hand, and we just move on. Going second is fine. It's not, and to my point, the problem is that we're more dependent on unsearchable cards, and we're more vulnerable to Zoro getting bounced, right? If you play through a Zoro, it's more likely to get bounced. And I just remembered a card that I did mean to mention on the tech side of things, so I will kind of mention It's to Die For there as well. I'll kind of edit that in. But they are able to answer their Zorojuro, so if you're playing through events or other on plays, you're better off. But none of those are searchable, right? So if you're going second, you really want to see your Mr. 2, and you're not going to see that 100% of the time. But if you do see Mr. 2 into Kid, into New Gates, you're kind of cooking. But the problem is that that's an unsearchable curve, right? So that's just where the consistency is slightly lacking there compared to Zoro being a little bit more searchable and having just one more turn to kind of get into that top end. And you just need kind of a New Gate if you go first, whereas you really want to see that Kid if you're going second, or a Kid going first is pretty good as well. So in Doflamingo, if you go second, they might have 2 6K bodies by your turn 3. And if you're on a 7K leader that turn off a Yasop or a Kid, it's a little tough. They can rip away like half your hand or take some life, depending on how they decide to allot their Dom. We're going to go into some mulligans for our going first curve, and then we'll come back here to talk about the play lines in more detail.
What's up, everyone? How we are taking mulligans against Dofi. We are going first. This is definitely the preferred curve. So we'll see what we get. Going first, I think I'd actually keep that. You got dependable ramp, you got a 2K, you got a searcher. Turn 1 we play our Nami, we search. Bottoming Nugget kinda hurts. We could go for a Zorojuro if we wanted to. I do think because we don't have a threat, I'm gonna go for a Luffy there. Let's say their turn 2, they probably swing at us pretty hard. We could 2 and 1 if it was an 8. Don't love that. Probably take a Beckman, see if we can find like a Newgate or something. No luck. I guess we don't know it's a Beckman, but take a life. We draw on our next turn. We don't get to play. I guess if it's their turn 2 there. So actually we wouldn't have taken this hit yet. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. We swing. Our following turn, we're on 5. I would definitely just go with the Bond Clay. Probably countering out of, whatever they hit us with in the meantime. Then you get to 9, you can play this, get another card back. You have some decent life. We're a little bit low on threats, but a Kid at the top end, a 10K swinger, if they don't red rock this, you can probably stabilize pretty healthily with the counter that you have. So that's a pretty good one. We're not gonna go that in depth on every curve that we have, but I do wanna get kinda, 5 or so hands in here. Add a couple minutes. Shuffling, was a straight half cut. Still going first. I actually think, even though we have a Nami, I'm gonna send this back. Even though we're gonna pretend for a second. Turn 1 Nami. No Zoro. Get to 2K probably. Play through maybe a vanilla Queen. Maybe get another Nami. Yeah. No, I think this curve ends up being a little slow. We probably play a turn 4 Kid, and then we do get into a new gate. It might stabilize out fine, but if they pressure us real hard and we only have these 1Ks, we did search up 1-2K, but I don't know. I think going first, it could count on that search, but I think I'd just shoot it back. Alright, straight no cut there. I tapped it. Oh no. So, that was probably a bad mulligan. I mean, it could be fine, but we mulligan into this, so we gotta keep it. Turn 1, nothing. Turn 2, nothing. Turn 3, we maybe took, probably. And then we play this. I mean, from there, there's potential to stabilize. We still do play our new gate on curve. If they pressure our light hand really hard, the following turn we just Gum Giant one of these two away. We get a Kid out of life, which would be another threat to play, another Giant, another new gate. That game probably shapes up pretty good, even though that mulligan was looking a little suspect. Going first, we're not keeping that. We're mulliganing that one. I think that one's easy enough to see. I do think it's pretty necessary to value 2Ks in your opener against Dofi. Things can just get ugly depending on how they pressure us if you don't and how you curve out. So we mulliganed. And that's glorious. We love that opener. If they pressure us hard, again, being a little bit light on 2Ks isn't favorable for us, but draw turn 2. Play out the Zoro. Probably take this life. Draw turn 3. Swing, probably counter with something of the sort. Or maybe even they, they bounce this, you play out the Bon Clay. Whatever, you probably lose a card or two here. Then we go into 9, drawing another card. You should probably just go straight for the new gate on curve. Got another new gate. Rush pressure, Giant to declutter. Looking pretty good. That's a snap keep, I think. And I think we'll call it there for going first. And we'll go into some going second.
All right, going first curve. Turn 1 and 2, obviously Nami and Zorojuros are the things that we're looking for. If you play a Nami, don't hit your Zoro. That 6-5, 6K with your leader, 5K with your Nami can be pretty nice to kind of get a 2K out of them and gain a life, take a life from them, or take a life and get a 1K. They're probably not going to take 2 hits there. So it's just nice to rip that extra card out of their hand, especially in this matchup. Every card counts, so it's something to think about. From there, if you go Zorojuro and they bounce it, and you don't have really a 5-7 curve, like if you have a Yasop and a 7 drop, you can go ahead and just play Yasop. Or if you have a Mr. 2, you can go ahead and play a Mr. 2. But if you don't have either of those, replaying that Zoro is still a great play. It still lets you ramp into your 9 drop or your new gate the following turn, unless they have the double bounce. But then if they're double bouncing, they're either using a law, and that means they're not developing any 6Ks, or they only developed 1 body if they did a Jozu. So that's just something that's kind of relevant. If they do double bounce their Zoro, it just kind of is what it is. Character pressure, this is probably one of the only turns that I'm really going to swing into a character for them that was played off lead effect. just to kind of chip away at their hand size or kind of take that body off board early, over just giving them extra card in hand, potentially. That being said, I'm not always going to do it. I don't know. I kind of feel medium punished on it sometimes. It feels like if they don't counter, it's because they don't really want to or care to, or if they do counter, it's because they have a ton of counter and they don't care and they want to. So it kind of gives them more agency again. But that being said, this is probably one of the few times where I am going to swing into a character. I consider it. If they play a line where they have an active Boa, then 8K 8K with Zoro is better than if you're gonna go 7 or mid. Like just going 2 8K swings is the most demanding off of them on that turn, and it can be very relevant to when if they're ever gonna block with Boa, they still have to give you 2 cards, or they have to give you 2/2Ks to not take a hit in the process. So it's just the most efficient swing when they have that active 6K. Somewhat similarly, if they play Arrested Boa, 8K, 8K into Boa are the consideration. But there's a lot to that around how they got it, their hand size, and maybe I can talk about that within some of the games we wrap up with. Where I did also mention putting that 4-drop that can be very costly to us if they rip our hand, and again, this is a matchup where every card does really matter. Where I will say that I've watched games just get shattered by this is if they swing. So a curve, something like this would be on their second turn, right? They're on 4 down. So then they go 8K out with their leader, and maybe it's just an 8K, or they have a Boa come out and it's a 9K into our leader. If you don't have the 2Ks for it, it's sketchy, right? If you have no 2Ks, then you kind of really got to take it. If you have 1 2K and it's an 8, there's consideration there to counter out of that, as long as it doesn't disrupt your curve. Your curve is more important than that life in that exact moment, but also, this is what you have to consider. If you went first, you draw a card, either you played a Nami which replaced itself, or you didn't, you still have 6 cards, then you play out your Zoro, you have 5 cards in hand. If they now swing into you, you now have 6 cards in hand, or maybe they swing 8K into you and they bounce the Zoro Juro to your hand. But you don't have 2K, so now you have a 6 card with Zoro, 7 card with the life that you take. You draw a card, you're up to 8. You play out 1 card, and then they either swing into you, and if you take that life not thinking, they'll immediately shuffle back in 8. Or sometimes even just right there, depending on what you've searched, if you have 7 or 8 cards, they might just try and go at you aggressively there. I guess relatively speaking, it's a little bit worse going second, falling into that trap, because you have the additional card in your hand off of going second, and they've been a little bit more aggressive. So we'll talk more about it from that side of things. But just playing around pudding, and if you ever get up to like 8 cards, especially if you get up to 9 cards in hand, just assume your hand's gonna get shuffled in. So you need to be aware of that, and there is a tiny bit of duality within the game, and this leader specifically that we play that only has 3 life, right? That yo-yo effect of if you overcommit, you feel pressured to give 3 1Ks to an 8K swing. That loss of card economy before you get your new gates and kids up can just cost you the game as well. So there's a lot to it, and we'll try and identify that through the gameplay. But a tempoed pudding that rips 3 cards out of your hand and they have been establishing a board, that's a game that you're probably just going to lose. Turn 4 and onward, we're going into kids and new gates. We want to be an 8K and ideally a 9K leader every single turn. Battling for board is going to be largely a fool's errand, in my opinion. Their entire deck is value. All of their 4 costs have on plays. Their leader takes cards from their deck and puts them in play. That's basically a drawing a card if you think about it, assuming they don't miss, right? Which if they're doing their value train, they probably aren't going to miss too often. Limiting the number of swingers possible is easier to do by making your leader larger than it is by clearing their board. If you're an 8K leader and they have 3 5Ks and their leader, they can only swing at you 3 times. Those attackers are null and void. Even if they're at 10 down, they can only swing at you 3 times. Obviously, with their 6Ks, if they have multiple 6Ks, that's when the math is a little bit easier for them. But that also just becomes even worse if you're playing through a Shanks as well. So it just kind of is what it is. And that's where I do say later, if they are really high rolling into their 6Ks, that they are the top deck right now for a reason, and we have to try and overcome that, right? But yeah, now we're going to go into our second turn, going second mulligans, and then I'll go into that curve.
All right, we are going second. We probably lost the dice roll. Definitely lost the dice roll because I'm taking first every time I win it against them, like we said. I guess my portable charger died, so if they don't run out here. Going second. This is fairly good. We have our guaranteed ramp, and then we do have. Technically, I kind of view Queen as a 7-drop in a lot of ways. Like, you can play it as a vanilla blocker every once in a while, but I kind of view Queen as a 7-drop, so this is kind of going to be our curve from what we see. But, turn 1, we draw a card. Turn 2, we play Bond Clay and draw a card. They could potentially bounce Bond Clay. Honestly, a lot of the time they bounce Bond Clay to your hand. I'm pretty happy with that personally. I just really don't mind it. I don't know. Like that counter back in hand already served its purpose. It's and sometimes it can be bigger than a 6K, but most of the time in the mid game it's going to be a 6K, so it's just not that valuable at the end of the day. But yeah, Newgate coming out of life. We already got a giant filtering through the Queen. We just look very good through this curve. 2K is coming up and everything. So that was a fairly easy keep. Inconsistent sections. Going second into Dofi. I'm sending this back. Hypothetically, right, we do have this into this. But going second, we're kind of on the back foot. If we're going first and they bounce Zoro Juro, it doesn't hurt as bad, in my opinion, as if we're going second and they bounce our Zoro Juro. So I think I would just probably pitch that. That would have been life. Anami on turn 1 would have got us a 2K, or maybe Sanji probably a 2K. Draw. Yeah, so I think I probably just shipped that, even though we kind of have the curve. If this was a Mr. 2, it's just with them being able to bounce it here, I don't know. I think that hand just wasn't quite what I want. I think I'm pitching that going second because their high roll could be pretty brutal there if they go, Jinbei into Law, and then either Jinbei into a 6K or just a straight up Weevil tempo could be pretty good for them depending on where they're at. So then that's their turn 3 bouncing. They may have already gotten out of 6K on turn 2. Then on turn 3, bounce our Law, or bounce with Law, or Jozu. Or no, Jozu's a 6-drop, but still. So yeah, we mold that. Then we get this as our second one. Not much better, but we kind of got to play it out. Turn 1, we draw, then have 2 Namis. So probably grab a giant here. Are we grabbing 2 giants off our Nami? So that's interesting. Then they swing at us. We don't have 2Ks, so we probably take this. We kind of cringe at that extra brick. We draw a card. We swing with 7. We play out the Zoro. Then we're playing for ramp into either a Queen or something else, a 7-drop or a Beckman. and then playing through our 9-drop or, you know, something else we top deck. With the Giants, we do get to filter out, you know, these Luffys once we get to the top of our curve. Depending on their pressure, it might be kind of hard to get there, honestly. After the Beckman turn, it might end up being like Beckman and then a blocker, leaving up some Giants. That might be the better defensive play, honestly, than playing out the 9-cost Luffy. So hopefully you're still kind of keeping up with me, but yeah, that's just where you'd probably have to play through it, is when you play through the Beckman, assuming you did get to ramp, you then could play out the Luffy and draw an additional card, which that would kind of be frustrating. But then you have no counter or no cards up, or no counter up, nope, no Don up, and I think that would just be a little bit less productive overall. So I'd probably end up going Queen, cycle some cards, Queen, cycle some cards, and leave Gum Gum Giant open in case they do try and exchange with you. But I don't know. Depends on their board state for sure as well. But yeah, that's where kind of going second can be a little awkward, even going, you know, technically we did ramp into our 7-drop, but the Beckman just doesn't offer as much pressure. And if they're really, you know, executing on their strategy, it's a little bit less favorable. So let's get one more Mulligan in. Let's see here. Going second. We're mad we lost the die roll, and we rip this hand. Again, I'm probably shipping it. Even if this was like a Shanks or something else, it's just a little bit too slow, not enough 2Ks for a Dofi. So let's see. The snap keep, the second hand, if it's perfect, flawless, beautiful. And that's better. We can play defensively at least. See a couple cards. I guess if it's Nami, we play the Nami, but probably be okay. Got a lot more defensive options through here. So again, that's just where like the going first curve just feels so much better. Being like going first, this isn't easy. This is great. I love this going first. It was that, right? Yeah. But going second, it's a little bit more unfortunate. And if they do bounce the Zoro, or you don't get another like 7-drop, it's a little bit unfortunate. And Queen works, but yeah. I guess we said it would have been these draws, right? But for sure. All right, let's go back into the game plan.
Going second, obviously a lot of things are going to kind of overlap. Here we are looking for our Mr. 2 into a 7-drop more than anything in the world. This is also where Sanji isn't the best 7-drop in this matchup per se, but having one more 7-drop, but particularly a searchable one for the curve, can be extremely helpful. Beckman on curve is amazing. Answering either a 6K or one thing that I think might be, I want to make sure that people don't overlook, is between Sanji, Beckman, and Newgate, the Newgate KO effect, getting a Marshall D Teach off the field is actually very valuable to us. To really, I mean, I guess anyone playing against him, but we're talking about RP Luffy, right? Getting that Teach off of the field is very valuable to us because it gives them just a sickening amount of Don efficiency, consistency for their leader effect, and just overall value that they just get to dictate too much with it. So I that's a high value target. There's times where I've played a Beckman and they have a Boa and a Teach, and I'm KOing the Teach. I'll KO the Boa by hitting them in the face and then make them block with it. But like, really, that Teach is a threat, and it will grind you out, and it does a lot of good things. So that is one thing I absolutely do think gets overlooked. And if I get the opportunity where like I play a Newgate and then I don't have a second Newgate, but I have a Eustace Kid, I'm probably going to go something like 7K with my leader. Well, actually, I'd play the Eustace Kid, right? Swing 8 with my leader, even better. So if they have a Boa, it's a 2 cards to block with me. Then they do whatever they want with that. then put 2 down onto the Newgate, swing in, KO their Teach if they have it. If they don't have the Teach, then I'll probably just put a little bit more Don on the leader, and swing 10 with Teach or with Newgate. But being able to snipe that Teach is very valuable. And then also with the Sanji, because he is a 7K that rests a Teach, especially early if they haven't like really set up their deck yet. If you rest that and swing into it, it can really blow out their curve. So don't just let a Teach stick around when you can do something about it. And then with that, where this conversation with Shanks does also come in is if you have this curve and you go to 7 Don and you either play a Beckman or you don't use your Don minus effect, which I'm not going to get into why not using a Kid Don minus effect against Dofi isn't very good. You can figure that out for yourself, hopefully. But against other matchups, you can maybe get away with it more than you can against Dofi. But if you don't use that or you use a Beckman, you do get to go straight into Shanks on 4, which is pretty good. If you do also do the It's to Die For double ramp, you do get to turn 4 Shanks too. But I guess what I'll kind of say to this end as well is not committing to face can cause us entire games. Realistically, if we try to take the foot off their face and swing into 6K bodies and try to board control, they're just going to grind us out. Kind of like I said, if we are playing through Newgates especially, they can't swing at us more than 3 times, 4 times ever, really. And if they are even swinging that many times, they're only ripping 1 case from us. And you get to grind them out much more effectively when you are using Kid, and then you play a 9-cost Luffy to draw a card, and that 10K swing goes into face, and maybe they will block with a Boa and get a little bit more down efficiency that way, but I'm not giving them free value of when they want to counter or what they can't counter and so on. I don't know. That's just kind of my overall, and I think you'll see that if you really pay attention to your games. If you start trying to play the board value game with them, I think it's very hard for us. But let me know if you have alternative results of like playing hard board control or going that alternative route as well. But then, how are we going to go ahead and close out this game? As I've kind of pointed to and repeatedly said, having our buffed up leader is extremely powerful. And then being able to maybe wall up a blocker when you're like a 7K leader with like a queen, you just make things very hard for them. If they're going to swing tall at you, you block it or use a giant. If they swing shallow at you, you just use 1K counters because you're a 7K leader. So there's just a lot of opportunity there. Obviously, I'm someone that's on Roger and Gear 5, and I think those cards stealing turns from your opponent can be extremely good. There's scenarios where you can see them going for lethal and know that you can never die, right? Mathematically, you won't die, but you can go to 0 with no risk of dying, and then you completely invalidate however many boas they have because you now play a Roger. Or if they swing everything and you then get to Gear 5 because they swung their boas, like you just get to push through very effectively. I know one of the games I'm going to go through is a game that I played after a round of locals last night, where I kind of had to make a interesting choice around what I'm trashing off of my queen so that I could have the opportunity to play through a Gear 5 or not, depending on what my opponent did. And it ended up paying off. So, I mean, we'll get into that as well. But between Gear 5, which maybe you're not on more than 1 or 2 copies, I hope everyone's on at least 1 Gear 5, please, just for me, at least 1. I think 2 is good. Sanji and Usohachi resting your boas, very, very effective down the line. You can find lethal, math it out, slow down, take your time. There's very dynamic lethals when you come to Sanji and Usohachi. And then Roger, obviously, if you're at 0, they're at 0. You can just do some pretty gross stuff. I've had games where, I've had kind of 2 different scenarios. I've had games where I've had the game go into like turn 7 and 8 against Dofi, and I never even got to 10 Don, or I got to 10 Don one time, and then I was using giants and other minus effects so much, like between queens and kids, and again, I just didn't get back to 10, but I won, which is pretty disgusting. I've also had games where I like rush out and either I like use a Sanji to rest their character, so that I can get in for a Roger later, um, or I just take a hit because I know again I have a Gungam Giant 3/2Ks in hand and I just don't die here, so I'm gonna Roger whatever. Like that line becomes pretty satisfying. At the end of the day, Dofi is again going to continue to be the most represented deck in '09 for what seems very likely. Maybe I'm hearing in the East that's falling off in OP10. If that's true, then maybe we start to tech and worry about other things. I don't think the deck changes very much going into OP09 or OP10, which is good. So this guide will probably be pretty healthy through OP10, unless they make some kind of hard changes. We can talk about those in maybe a follow-up video. But I think this will be a solid kind of guide um, through this. But like at the end of the day, what I was kind of getting there too is like if they do their high roll where it's like Jinbei into Boa, Jinbei into Weevil, and you don't hit like a flawless curve, it's okay to lose that game, relatively speaking. Like I just quite frankly, like if you do Newgate Chain, I've gotten through games like that. But at the end of the day, those are the games that you're gonna have to kind of be okay with losing, unless you're gonna be just play Dofi. Every deck right now, like I just had that conversation with someone at locals last night. Was they're like, I know you've been like this one trick on this, and I haven't seen you in a while, and it's good to see you're still on it. But like, doesn't this 3 help just like scare the shit out of you? And I was like, no, because quite frankly, a lot of the things that I lose to, everyone like, if Dofi goes Jinbei 6K, Jinbei 6K, Jinbei 6K, everyone loses. I'm not the only one that loses to Jinbei, right? So it just is what it is. And in a lot of the cases, I live through more of it than you guys do because of the way that my leader interacts with them, being able to increase my power and manipulate the counter that I'm able to use. And now even Gum Gum Giant's hand efficiency is so disgusting that our survivability is off the charts. And he was kind of like, oh, I mean, that makes perfect sense. But yeah, I'm really like 3 Life. It's a little annoying just from the cards we see sometimes, but the quality of cards is getting so high that it doesn't really concern me all that much anymore. But now I need to go find a couple of these gameplays, like I said, the one from last night, and then maybe a couple others, and paste that onto the end of this, and we got a guide for us. If you enjoyed this, please do like, comment, subscribe. We are still shooting for 500 and 1,000 for kind of full monetization of the channel. Days Pirates Discord. If you want to check out any of my deck lists, talk about any matchups, have an opinion on your deck list, help with any fillers for budget options, I have a budget video that I will be doing soon. Just wanted to get this guide and hopefully BY Luffy out pretty soon, and maybe we'll weave in that budget guide in there as well. But at the end of the day, appreciate you guys, and we'll go see a couple games and wrap this thing up. Let's jump into that game. So this is a player from one of my locals. We did a round at locals and had time for an additional game. So we ran it back. He's playing Doflamingo. He actually just got back from participating in Bandai Card Fest and was 34th. So tiebreakers kept him out of top 32. So a solid player. So thought it'd be kind of nice then to just jump to a secondary game that I got with him. He did allow me to go first this time because I roll in the first matchup. So kind of game 2, I got to choose to go first, which again is important in this matchup. As we so he's debating with his Perona here and passing. I believe I kept my hand. I think we both kept our hands. I think I remember my curve being fairly favorable in that opener. Jinbei, that's fine. So I'm gonna do take here. So this is one of those cases where we do need to be a little bit wary of like a putting play through the mid game here. Because he has an active Boa, like we said, we are going to go 8-8 split with Rojuro. You just go 8. So if he is going to counter, he didn't. But if he did, it would still take 2 cards if he blocked and countered at that point. And in this game, he does still have a pretty good curve, right? Turn 2, Jinbei, Perona, or Jinbei and Boa on field is fairly good. I think he said he kind of messed up a sequencing there, like that Perona swing wasn't the most effective, maybe. Kind of forgetting. Does go for 6. We got 1. You got the 1 for that. Then that teach, man. That's so much value. Another Jinbei into Boa. So looking pretty grim, right? This is not the curve we want to see from them, but we did get the initiative. We did get to ramp, which is good. So we are going into a 9-Don turn here. And you guys will go 8 in, and I have to take that one instead of giving up 2 cards at that point. We effect up to 9. Go straight into our new gate, 8K. I'm considering going to a Boa, but I say, you know what? We're just going to press face, and if you want to block and counter, it's the same difference. Or he just blocks. So he is probably a little bit low on 2Ks. So if I had swung into the Boa, it probably would have been the same outcome in that particular case. But again, I'm just pressuring face. He's already down to 2 life, and that's kind of what we got to do. Limit the amount of pressure that they can put back on us. Not having Giant up here does make me a little nervous. He's going to go for a similar line as last time I played him, which he went like a little bit taller, which he does here. Do get 2 and 1 out of me for the 10K, leaving the blocker up. It's pretty solid. That's a very effective turn from him. No surprise in there. Now I'm at 10. Kind of debating what I want to do. I believe I end up pressuring with 8 from my lead. And I do believe I take the opportunity here to answer the teach. Just deny some value there and take a life. And then we develop a blocker. And I was, this is kind of a decent way to set up. If you have a blocker, a giant, and a life, you have a lot of room to work with how they're going to pressure you. They might just go 6-6-6-6-6, and you kind of gotta, maybe blow something there. But we'll see how he plays it. And I'm debating pretty heavily. Oh yeah, so this is actually very interesting. I'm trying to remember exactly what was in my hand. I believe it was a 1K, a 2K, or maybe 2Ks. I think it was a 1K, a 2K, 2 Gum Gum Giants, and a Gear 5. So if I'm going to play with a plan to use both of my Gum Gum Giants, I will not be able to Gear 5. So I'm very heavily debating here whether I need to get rid of the Gear 5. I don't want to get rid of one of my flat counters and keep 2 giants and not have an extra 2K or 1K. I think it was a 1K, but we'll see in a second. So I do believe after a little bit of agony, do end up trashing a Gum Gum Giant. Because I just want to keep the extra like flat counters in my hand, and I want to play to a Gear 5 win con in the next turn or so. Bluffing 2 giants, though, even while trashing one, is very intimidating, I think. Also, to that point, I am on Radical Beam, right? So if I do find a Radical Beam, I will have an opportunity to use that alongside. Yeah, it was a second 2K. Yep, 2 2Ks. Another 6. At this point, I'm heavily debating. See, it's on open. If I take this, he could potentially perfume Femur me for 13K, and I didn't have guaranteed counter for that. I may have been able to find it, but I did not have guaranteed counter for that. And then also, I was down to only a Gum Gum Giant and my Gear 5, I believe. Yep. I need to resleeve my deck. Maybe. But I was down to Gum Gum Giant as my only counter option. So I did to block here, showing kind of concern for that perfume femur line. And I did talk to him afterwards. He did say that he was lining up to Grav Blade just because he didn't want to let me keep the queen either way. But because I didn't, he got to play Sengoku, get a 2K, play another Sengoku, get a 2K. Then he plays 4 for a law and bounces a Sengoku, replays a Sengoku. And at this point, actually, he got 2Ks, and he elects to grab a Boa from this standpoint, and um, he ends up being just short on counter. A little bit of spoiler alert. Um, he ends up being just short on counter. Because he does grab the Boa here, thinking he can kind of play through that in the next like following turns, which is kind of a crazy, near exactly difference. Now let's just send it gear 5 time. Kind of assuming he's going to block. Not necessarily positive that we're going to get there, but we're going to go for it. 7. That reach is better than anything else in the game. And 12. Yeah. So if he didn't get the bow, he would have had it. But yeah, we got there. Yeah, very, very good game. Kind of early pressure on through the boas, even through the double Jinbei into double boa. Being able to play through a new gate into a gear 5 is just very, very strong. We're gonna get a couple sim games up. So I guess that's recording just a tiny bit late. They went first. They played a Mihawk off their leader effect. I went second, played a Nami. I'm assuming I Usohachi off of the, and then use that immediately. We go 7 in. We do pressure. This is that's a thing. I didn't really say this earlier in the video, so if you're still here, you get an extra nugget. This Mihawk, on the rare times that it does hit the field, I've prioritized removing this Mihawk. This is one of the only 5Ks that I'm really swinging into, besides maybe an early Jinbei or maybe early game. But if it's a 5K, it doesn't seem that worth it ever. For as far as like even the Jinbeis and Geckos, the Mihawk I agree with, even though it's still a 2K. Um, but yeah, so he gets a Perona restack now. He's gonna get hand filtering. He knew what cards he's gonna pick up too, which is pretty good for him. So he pressures again. I got to stay pretty healthy in this game. I think I ended up taking that because I was wanting to see another card or a threat. Um, and he did bounce my Zoro, which is really annoying there. And this time, hang on a second. So because I was at 6 down with this hand, I did elect to just play a queen with no effect because I'm going to 9 down next turn anyways. I got good baseline counter. Their board isn't aggressively wide for being turn 4. So yeah, I just check into the Mihawk, and then which very unlikely they're gonna out 2 cards, and then develop a blocker in case they do go like heavy on me. If they like swing like 9K or something like that, then I can get out of that. Instead, they spend their turn bouncing it back to our hand, and this could be a case where pudding starts to get at us, but continuing to counter out and being so low on bricks, like we're just so flexible, and I do really enjoy that about this deck in this current meta. So kid on 9 is fine. Still turn 4 kids fine. So they're turn 5. They're playing out the Perona that they bounce. Restacking again. The Gozu body is a little bit annoying for us, but if we're staying at 7K, Yeah, we can probably grind out here a little bit. You see, he has this body, but he doesn't have multiple 6K bodies, so it's a little bit more inefficient for him. This is one we're gonna have to take. Played another Mihawk off of the Jinbei, so that's a little bit aggressive of him, but I'm probably still just not seeing the 6Ks that he'd usually want to play in this case. Again, we're just pressing face. If we're gonna be a 7K leader, oh, I actually I accidentally didn't leader effect, or didn't kit effect. I was pretty mad about that. I actually kind of remember that now. Um, I did pull a couple games from further back just because it was some good wins. So not as fresh on the memory as the game that I played yesterday with my friend. There, locals, buddy. I was so mad about that. I mean, just say, all right, we'll deny your draw value, and that's one of those things where it's like the sin, like it's just that's not a thing that would ever happen in person. I think I meant to cancel the attack, so I was kind of just thinking if I wanted to invest in Edan or go a little bit harder. Um, but it's kind of not his problem, so not the best manners for me to kind of put that in there. But man, in this type of matchup, that's so frustrating. But it's one of those things where it's like, well, I know that would never happen in a Treasure Cup or a regional because that's all paper, right? Don't have to really worry about that, but it still is pretty frustrating here, getting ripped of 2 cards because you just don't have shit else. Then he just Kaidos, refills his hand. And honestly, with all my bitching, if he just pressed aggressively there, he probably just kills me. So I maybe not the best coaching video here that I got. I just went through the end and saw the end state. I was like, well, that looks interesting. We can pull that up. But being a 9K leader, it gets us out of the Kaido swings because I guess they were still nervous or maybe thought I was bluffing with the kid. But now that I have 2 giants, I am pretty defensively able here. They are smart though. They do swing in a way that demands a giant and a card, but I just take that because I know that that was like the biggest hit that he can have, unless he does that. And I say, okay, well then I'll giant that. So again, I mean, worth noting if he had kind of swung a little bit more uh, pokey at me, could have punished a bit harder. And I guess maybe shouldn't have included this one with the misplay around the kid and being a little bit of a baby about it, but kind of playing through that. We did end up being in a fairly strong position for that last turn, to where we could have made quite a few different plays depending on how they did elect to swing into us. But I guess that's kind of part of the bait too, right? Is like I let you take the 13, so this is probably good. But I had the counter for that. So, and I was a 9K leader. Oh yeah, that was the other thing is being a 9K leader for these. It's a 4 down investment to swing with either of these. So actually, never mind. That was probably the best thing for him to do. Because at best he can swing with 2 of these, and yeah, that's not any better. So that's actually completely fine. That sequencing there. Had I properly used Kid last turn, he wouldn't have been able to attack me so aggressively. So that line for him to probably try to kill me last turn would have been closed off by the Kid effect most likely. Um, but here we are. Realistically, if it's up the Kid effect, I probably would have just played out a queen and gone a little bit further. But another Doflamingo game here. This is before the ladder reset too, so we're playing some pretty high ranked folks. I did get to go first, which as we continue to mention, we do really like. Six into Zoraduro. We got some 2Ks. Eight into Weevil. You would like to take that. Because we went first, we're at 7 now, so we're not going to be immediately threatened by pudding, most likely. Or not too detrimentally, relatively speaking. Even though we are going to, I guess when I play my Nami, I do end up at 7. and 7 with a filtered card. It is a little vulnerable to putting. I don't remember if he does that here or not, but that is something where maybe I should have counted out of that first swing given the fact that I had the 2Ks. I think I was just trying to secure my curve, because if I had pitched a 1 at that time, I think the Zoro came out of life, so it's now I go 2 and 1. I'm back down to 5, so we're not really concerned with putting now. Did you get to pick up a 2K and go in for another 8? We do just take that one, yeah. And beautiful, it's exactly what we want to see is a new gate there on curve. So we do get the opportunity to swing in for 5 because we got to keep our Zoro. So now we do go in for 8 after that, which has just got an extra card out of hand, which is nice. Usually I don't leave the rank thing up there this whole time. I mean, I think that's a 6. I think he's one of the top players actually. Either way, it was either a 5 or a 6 billion berry bounty, so they would have been probably top 50 or so at least at that point. But then 2Ks. Sorry, I got a little sidetracked because ADD. 7 in. Gonna bluff the giant with the Luffy, kind of either way. The fact that he blocks there doesn't open me up to pressuring his life very hard. A little bit disappointing seeing the Nami off of that when I could have searched for a giant as opposed to bluffing a giant. But interesting here, worth noting. Again, an extra nugget if you stuck all the way here. Um, I generally speaking would say that bluffing a giant or having the opportunity to use the last giant out of life is better than searching with a Nami and leaving yourself with no active dot. Unless you have like no 2Ks, but even so, like it just kind of shows desperation almost. And maybe it wouldn't have been a hard punish here, but it could have been. Whereas them having to think about a giant and me maybe hitting one off makes a very, very big difference. I don't think I'm on rad beams at the time of this. Finally minimize that. I don't think I'm on rad beams at the time of this game. Now he's thinking pretty hard. Oh, red rock on my new gate. That's pretty good. He's waiting how he wants to swing and pressure me. I do like to use the 1K. Interesting there. Maybe I should have used the Beckman instead of the Queen. I have less Beckman, so maybe that was my thought process at the time. But to some extent, I ooh, I don't know. Maybe I do plan on using the Beckman to KO a Boa, but I have the Usahachis, so yeah. I don't know. Probably should have just got rid of that. That was probably my thought at the moment. But now we just rest both. Give 14 and 6K to get there. They feel pretty good about it. They only get up to 13, and if they had another 2K, which they have a 1K, but if they had another 2, then they need another 2K, and just figure that we'd probably be in good shape. So yeah, I mean that kind of wraps up the matchup guide for Doflamingo. If you have any other questions, join the Discord, hit me up. But I hope this was pretty well rounded for y'all. Like, comment, subscribe. Tell your friends to subscribe because we're the best RP Luffy channel that exists. We're gonna blow up in 2025 with some big tops. So appreciate the support, y'all, and keep it coming. Thanks.